Hello, welcome to another episode of The Circuit. I am Ben Bajarin.
Greetings, programs. I am Jay Goldberg.
We appreciate all of the positive feedback you've given us of our last two guests, Artagius and Ilashmawi from Lattice on FPGAs. As you know, I think we've sort of said our goal with guests is just to find some of the most interesting people and topics in silicon and bring them on. So we're pleased that you like that, and the feedback has been good. So thank you for that. It's been a little bit of time since we've had guests the last 2 weeks, since Jay and I have covered some hot topics, and we've got some hot topics because a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks since we chatted. We've got Google I/O, we've got Microsoft Build, and we've got the season that just keeps giving in Nvidia earnings. So yeah, that's the topical flow for today. So let's start with Google I/O. Obviously, there's new TPUs. They're out the door with an ARM CPU. So let's start with those because then there's gonna be some threads we'll pull on with that into these other conversations. But high level, you've digested the news from Google I/O on their Infra. What was your take?
So on the purely infrastructure side, to me the big news was the announcement of their CPU Axion, and that's kind of cool. It's a new chip, a new CPU in the market. I mean, I think we all suspected they were working on it, but it's good that it's out in the marketplace. Um, the new TPU looks pretty promising. Again, we kind of had an idea where it was, but it's a good set of chips, I'm pretty sure they said they were using it for training now more extensively. I think they explicitly
Yes.
said that.
Yep.
And so that was, I'm not worried about Nvidia because I think they're still using a lot of Nvidia at Google, but it's pretty cool that Google's the number two in training right now, training silicon. So that's encouraging. And they also came up with a name. Like they finally realized everyone else was getting cool names, so they called it Trillium, which is
Trillium. I train on Trillium. I take Trillium to train my AI. Put it in my water. My supplement. Oh man. Well, so you make a good point though. So there's two things, right? This was the first. Okay, I'm gonna give you my tone, my read on tone and posture, and then see if you think this lines up. Um, I feel like they made a really big deal of their training chips, and said, look, we're training our workloads on this. We've got lots of people training our workloads on this. Like they really hammered the training point. And then I feel like kind of and we've also got Nvidia GPUs was sort of secondary to that. Like it's a sort of a toss away. And I say that as a complete counter to what AWS did at reInvent, where it was like, here's our newest Trainium and Inferentia, and then, oh, and by the way, we've got Nvidia GPUs, and spent
right,
all this
right.
time. And so it felt like the custom stuff was kind of the throwaway, and the Nvidia GPU relationship was the like, here's the big thing, and that felt very different in Google I/O, which to me shows Google's commitment and progress and maturity of TPUs for their workloads. That I kind of feel like that they're basically like, it's just about there. It's good enough, or for most of the stuff you need, it's plenty. So I do think that was an interesting. I don't know. I'm just going to say posture, because it really felt like the TPU was far more of a priority in that than it was just the NVIDIA GPUs, which they have, but they didn't make far as big of a deal of the B100s and all that stuff coming as they did their TPUs.
Yeah, and I think that's in part because the odd. I mean, this is the dilemma that Google faces is they want to talk about their own technology, but they also like their own technology, things that they're going to do for their own services, which is really what they care about. And then there's Google Cloud, GCP, where they're serving other people's software needs. And I think that's always taken second seat in Google exec priorities. Um, it's not as bad as it used to be, but like, so I think most of the GCP customers would far prefer to use Nvidia, and so they need to at least mention that they have it. Uh, but for if you care about Google's core business, TPU matters much more. That's what's powering Gemini and all their AI features. Like that was really what their emphasis on. Um, and so GCP is not quite an afterthought, but it's definitely in the passenger seat,
Yeah.
at least in communications wise,
Yeah.
as opposed to Amazon, who like I think they went through a period in the last 6 months where they weren't getting allocation from Nvidia, and it was starting to concern them because their customers really care about Nvidia only, and don't at this point don't care about Inferentia and Trainium.
Yes. Right. So, okay. So that's the I don't know, silicon side on their TPUs. Let's spend a minute revisiting this ARM in the data center conversation, which we know a lot of people have heard us talk about before. So, all right, so Google's on Gen 1. Um, I think their positioning of this product is consistent with everybody else's, right? Sort of emphasizing performance, wattage, energy savings, and then let's just say, for lack of a better word, cloud native workflows. And this has been consistent. This is kind of how everybody's positioning these things now. I don't know if it will always stay there. I think they're going to start making some really good reasons why you might run some AI workloads on a combination of their custom CPUs and custom accelerators, but that is not today. But I think their positioning is in line where we're seeing ARM instances go as an alternative to many of the cloud native x86 instances, because a lot of that software is there, that those libraries are there. It's much more easy to port that software over to the ARM architecture for data center CPUs. So, did you read? Do you think that's similar? That their positioning was kind of like everybody's positioning for their ARM CPUs, including Google's, is relatively the same, right? The same value propositions. They're all sort of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite know how to decode Google's messaging around Axion, but I guess in fairness, I'm not never really sure how to decode Amazon's messaging around Graviton. They both. I haven't seen benchmarks yet, but Graviton's doing pretty well. Axion is in its first generation, so it's hard to do great things in your first gen. So I'm not expecting too much there, but just the fact that they're there is I think is the main message. Is like Google's here and they've got a decent track record. I'm really curious to see how they're going to position Axion and how
Yeah.
much internal workloads they're going to put on that, or
Right.
if it's really for customers.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I,
So you also hit on something I think that's really interesting is, um, and I had some conversations about this with Microsoft that we'll get into in a minute, but the they are running a lot of internal workloads on these. Like I keep saying, hey, and this happened at reInvent. I was like, what, tell me more about, Graviton, what intros are there. There's a lot of Amazon stuff. Like they're dog fooding it, but they're also finding value, parts of e-commerce stores, parts of the services chain, some of the SaaS chain. And that's great. Like they're running there's this those custom efforts are actually helping them save money. They're running those, but they're also for third party customers. And Microsoft kind of said that the same thing, same way at Build, where they said now you can use Cobalt. And it was sort of like, well, before you couldn't because they're actually running a bunch of software on it, but now it's available for other people to start using Cobalt. So again, they've been using it. They I guess proved it out, dog fooded it. Now it's ready, and they made that point on stage that customers can now start using Cobalt. So I do think it's an important it's an important perspective that it's not just for third parties for the purpose of performance, wattage, sustainability, price, etc. the hyperscalers are actually moving workloads to those ARM based instances as well, and they're available for for third parties as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is where I'm not quite sure what to make of it, and it's something I'm getting more curious about. Is to what degree do third parties really want to run on ARM? Because it's one thing to say, "Hey, run on Graviton, run on Axion," because we're going to discount it, and it's more power efficient. It costs you less. Most third parties are going to need a really meaningful price differential, TCO differential, in order to justify porting their workloads from x86 to these new CPUs.
Hmm.
From what I can tell, Amazon has mostly marketed Graviton as cheaper, like it's a price discount, and it's a meaningful enough one that I know lots of people are. Like, I think they listed like 50, 100 people, outside customers, 200 customers, some big number running on Graviton. So there's clearly some traction there. It'll be interesting to see how Google positions it as well. And then what I'm really curious about, and I know you are too, is let's say I'm a Fortune 5,000 company and I've been running on Graviton. How much work do I now have to do to switch it over to Google's Axion?
Excellent
That
question.
like that's gonna be a really really big one. And I know the folks at ARM care about this a lot, and if they're listening, we're watching. So we're keeping an eye on this one because if it's really easy to port, if it's just a simple one click transport, that'll be a big deal because that will really open up a fair amount of competition in the market. Uh,
Agreed. So I think we should spend a moment on this point because we have talked about ARM in the data center, the custom hyperscaler efforts, and we had sort of trended toward, and I want to caveat this with saying I still think some of this is true, but I've changed some of my perspective on the well, you'll see where I'm going. Okay, so the the hyperscalers ARM cores originally, I was like, well, they're doing all these things, not just their accelerators. They're doing these ARM cores because they want to put layers of software on top of them to create more lock-in. Now, there's elements of that's true, right? They do want you fully in their stack. However, having now talked to the Amazon folks, ARM about this, and Microsoft, um, they actually want to make it as simple as possible for you to take a workload from an ARM hyperscaler somewhere else and put it on theirs. Like they want you to think of it like x86 in that it's architecturally compatible. Once you've done that work, you can choose. Now, someone may not. Like I don't really see a lot of switching, to be honest with you. However, they do want it to be clear that these are portable workloads once you've done the work, very similar to your x86 workload. So we'll see. But to me, this was always like we want to lock you into our ARM cores, and that's not actually their view. Their view is we want to make it easy for these workloads to be portable. Once you've moved to ARM, it's architecturally compatible somewhere else. So the degree that that's true or will happen, that's their view, and it was different from kind of how I approached their ARM CPU strategies a few months ago.
yeah, and I think my take at the time was I don't think there is real lock in around ARM silicon.
Yeah.
It, the hyperscalers wouldn't mind if there was, if they could find a way to do it, they wouldn't mind putting some lock in. But I don't think it's easy. I think for me now it's just a matter of a question of like there's going to be a lift, right? When you move from even in x86, if you move from Intel to ARM, it's pretty simple, but there's still a little bit of lift that has. To, sorry, from Intel to AMD within the x86 ecosystem, it's pretty easy to move, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
zero
Mm-hmm.
effort.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be true going from Amazon's Graviton to Google's Axion? Can I
Right.
just one click cross compile? And I think it's going to be again, it's going to be pretty easy, but not zero. And I think
Agreed.
that's enough. That still drives things forward.
Agreed. What I'm unclear of though is why switch? Like you're probably not switching just for that instance. You're switching for something else. Maybe it's the in Google's case, right? The TPU, the training, the cost savings there. Maybe in Microsoft's case, it's Maya down the road. I don't know. But my point is like why I don't think cost is going to be that different. There's the cost is going to so there's got to be a reason in this switching dynamic to switch, and I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, there's two axes for switching, right? There's switching between x86 and ARM, and then there's switching between AWS and
Right,
Google or Azure.
right. The second one is what I'm
And
talking about.
right, so this the second one, I think there's a lot of talk in those circles about multi-cloud. Everybody
Yep.
wants to be multi-cloud. Very few people do it because it's painful and it doesn't usually drive the benefits you think it does. Um, at least that's my experience talking to CIOs over the years. Everybody wants to be multi-cloud. They love the idea of being able to switch from one to the other. And if you can really switch from Axion to Graviton or vice versa, I think that's something that customers would actually want. Whether they actually do it in practice is a whole different story. But the I don't know. This it's an important question, and I'm really curious to see how this all plays out.
Yeah. Agreed. But I think at the same time, I think these are good questions for us to hold and think about when you're really on everybody but Amazon is on their first gen ARM CPUs. So, we just don't know. I think everyone needs more time. I would say by year three, Gen 3, we might have a lot more insights as to kind of how this is played out. Because again, Amazon's on multiple versions of this. They do have customer success stories, but it's still a far smaller percentage of their x86 instances. So even multiple gens in, but now that everybody has one, it's like okay, I can see the potential for the ecosystem to emerge for ARM in the data center, but I think we still need a couple more years for that to happen.
Yeah, and in background of all this too is Graviton is probably what 20-30% of AWS now
You think?
at most,
Yeah, I don't think it's that high, but sure. Okay.
right? And is that going to go up? I right? I don't think it is. I think we're always going to have a lot of x86 in the data center. I don't think that's going away. Maybe it goes a little bit lower, but I, there's still gonna be a lot of x86 in the data center for a long, long time.
Totally agree. Totally
Yeah,
agree. But I think again the point here, which we'll get to also from a Microsoft standpoint, is that having more players in the ARM ecosystem inevitably helps. But how much we don't know. How much it helps ARM get more data center share, we don't know. But having all three hyperscalers with cores, obviously, Oracle with Ampere, like that helps. But it's still very early days for that. So upside, but we need more time. So we'll hold that tension and that question and keep talking about it. But okay, so the other thing that happened, and we'll just only spend a brief amount of time on this because next week we're going to dig into this a little bit more. Um, Qualcomm is finally out with product on Windows on ARM. And part of Build was launching this new category of PCs called Copilot PCs. And there's a couple interesting things here worth thinking about because I do think there's optimism, and then I've seen everybody on the skeptical side be like, "Oh, this is just Windows on ARM all over again. It's not going to work. My apps are going to suck. Yada yada yada." But we saw something happen that in the history of new PC event or a new challenger entrant to the PC ecosystem happen I've never seen before, which is a massive amount of design wins across portfolios, brands, and SKUs of every major OEM for Qualcomm. And where that hit me was if you think about it, like I think AMD has some really good client silicon products, right? There's brands that picked up brand or OEM lines that picked up Qualcomm that never picked up AMD. And I'm like, okay, I mean, it's impressive. Like, I'll give you a good example. Dell with XPS has been so tied into Intel forever, and that's their premium product. They never shipped AMD, even though I think AMD would have made a better option for them a couple years ago. They just never did it. 100%. Every XPS SKU now has a Qualcomm X Elite option. So just the sheer breadth and depth that they saw in terms of design wins, AMD has never had that. And it just blows my mind. And I do think part of it is Microsoft's trying to create a new category of PCs called Copilot Plus PCs, which have all this wonderful AI stuff into it. But just objectively so, because I saw some of these benchmarks and talked with Microsoft teams, the battery life on these Qualcomm machines is better than Macs in a lot of cases, and just absolutely crushes AMD and Intel in terms of battery life. And so clearly everybody was like, we need to have Windows computers in the world that last more than 12 hours, maybe more than 10 hours, depending on how old you're maybe 8 hours. I don't know, depending on how old you're, but there's going to be a transformational battery life with these. And I think that was probably one of the bigger reasons why we just had monumental adoption of Qualcomm SKUs across the board. So that to me was kind of a this isn't the same as before moments, but I'm very curious to see what happens when people get their hands on these things and start reviewing them.
I think it's a really good point. It's a really good point. The fact that AMD didn't get a lot of these OEMs on board and Qualcomm did. I know in the past, like if you were trying to compete with Intel in anything, and Intel found out that you were talking to whatever other
Yes.
supplier for
Right.
CPUs, I'm leaving names out here on purpose. Um, Intel would punish you. The the OEM. If you're an OEM talking to another chip vendor about replacing Intel in any SKU, and Intel found out, there would be repercussions from that. There'd be consequences. And I suspect Microsoft came in and said and pushed this and said, "Don't worry about that. Don't worry about those consequences. We want this." And I think that drove everyone to Qualcomm, right? And I think that's it's a really important thing you pointed out. I
Yeah.
will say this. I think it's clear to me that Qualcomm's with Snapdragon X Elite X is technically it's a good product, and they've come a long way since their last PC CPU in terms of software. And I wrote about this a few weeks ago. Like they've come a really long way in getting the software where it needs to be, and it'll be close. Like I'm sure it won't be as good, but like for most applications, it'll be no noticeable difference. And like even down to like games, like they've ported a whole bunch of games to natively run on Qualcomm. So they've made a lot of progress on that front. It's big. It's a big change for them. It's important.
Yep.
So full credit to them for that. What is now going to be a big question to me is how commercial is this? Because it's a different, like the business of this of selling PCs is a little bit different. You have to get into all the channels, and that's a very complicated thing. Qualcomm doesn't have a lot of experience with that, with these specific channels. So
Yep.
like the product looks good now. Now it's the commercial side of it and the operation side of it, and but they don't need to take 10 points a share. Like they just need to prove that they can get call it 5, 3, and that's enough to justify staying in this and building it up over time.
So okay, so there's a couple parts to this. So there's a you're totally right in channel. However, retail is going to go all on board with this. And like I've honestly never seen, just from what people were telling me, that Best Buy is going to do in these stores around Copilot PCs. I it's hard to remember a time where this big of a campaign and positioning statement around these new PCs is going to be showcased at retail before in a really long time, to be honest with you, if not ever. I don't know. I mean, it's significant. Now, does anyone care who buys at Best Buy? Like, to be honest with
Yeah,
you, like I am 100% going to go fake be a blue shirt at retail when these things launch, just to see what
yeah,
people say. I want to know
yeah,
what people say. Like, what questions do you ask? What can it do? I hear about all this AI and PC, but my point is, it's been a long time since we've seen this kind of an attempt to reinvigorate the PC category. So I'm genuinely intrigued. And again, the fact that Qualcomm is the only SKU that's going to be there for 6 months, maybe longer, I just super curious to see how this plays out.
Yeah, I don't want to be the curmudgeon, the house
No, you
curmudgeon,
are the
but
curmudgeon, so do it. You
so
have to
I'm
be.
like I I didn't go to the event. I didn't watch. I watched the highlights of the keynote. The features that Microsoft launched around AI are what are going to matter here. Right, the battery life is important, but that's like an upgrade cycle thing. Nobody's going to go out and buy a new PC just because this one has much better battery life. They'll choose that one over it, but they're not going to rush out to get it just because of the battery life. Now they might rush out to go buy a new PC if it had some incredible features that they really really wanted. And I'm not sure that what I saw from Microsoft is. I don't know how
Yeah,
that's going to resonate
that's
with
fair.
consumers.
That's
And
fair.
some of it looked like kind of cool, but also like none of it made me go, "Oh, I really need to get that."
Yeah, that's
Um,
fair.
like what is it? Rewind or recall? I forget
Recall.
which rewind is Mac. There's recall.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm not the target customer for that. I'm not sure. I
right.
try to live my
Right.
life looking forward. I don't want to look back.
Except when you lose a document, except when, it's an interesting feature, but I agree with you. But I think the writing on the wall of infusing computers with useful predictive AI features that kind of give you these little superpowers in some way is great. But I don't think we've fully landed on the big aha for consumers where they're like, that's it, my life has changed.
Right.
But I do think it will be intriguing, and that's what I want to see. Anyway,
We don't.
let's
Yeah,
move on from this,
we
and
don't know. Yeah, we don't know
we
what the
don't know.
superpowers are. This is
Right.
not flight or X-ray vision.
Exactly.
This is like teleportation over 10 feet.
Yeah. Right.
I'm watching
Exactly.
a lot of
But I
X-Men
think
lately.
X-Men 97. Um, but I think the point is this is a really interesting time to see what's happening. And we just have dynamics in the PC space we've never seen before. And then the last thing I'll say is I was I mean, I've studied this PC category for many, many years. This is the first time I've really ever seen Microsoft wholly own the entire ecosystem. Like people just are doing whatever they want. And in a lot of ways that's really good because Windows is in a really good state. It's fixed a lot of stuff, a lot of crust that was there with this new kind of modern version on Copilot PCs. So I'm at the point where I'm like, you buy a Windows PC a Copilot PC going forward, like you're actually going to have a really good experience with almost any of these products that we'd recommend. That was really hard before. Like it was always like, well, if you want a good experience with Windows, you need to get this one. Everything else, who knows? It might break. You might have support issues, battery life. Windows and the ecosystem is in the healthiest place I think it's ever been. So I just think that's an interesting point to see what positive impact that has going forward. So we'll leave it at that.
Yep.
Let's move to the event of every quarter, Christmas of every quarter, called Nvidia earnings. Um, okay, I'm sure most of our listeners have gone through all of this, so I guess let's just start with some of our high level takeaways from earnings. So you go first.
It was another really good quarter in a string of good quarters to the point where I'm almost becoming numb to it, and I have to remind myself
Right,
just how huge they have gotten.
right,
Right. And the big question was there's two big questions was is demand still outstripping supply? Answer
yep,
yes. And is the launch of Blackwell eating into demand, cannibalizing demand for H100 or Hopper? And the
right,
answer is no. No. They're going to sell both of them. And somebody asked Jensen about it, and his answer was customers. What did he say? He said customers will performance average their way into it,
mm,
which is a really awkward way of saying they'll buy whatever they can get.
yep, yep.
So that's my quick summary of their quarter.
So I'm going to just point out. two things. One was this again second quarter point on inference being 40% of revenue. I still have no idea how they're coming to this number. I don't know how you isolate inference from training on a customer's workloads, but fine. They're saying 40%. That's the second time this number was, so it hasn't grown. Basically, it stayed steady at 40%. But we've talked about this a ton. Like the argument has to be made that all of your AI workloads will run on Nvidia, not just training, because if it is, it just means training's a short-term blip, it's a bubble, and then we have too many GPUs. So we've said this before. So if they can continue to make the case that inference is a key workload for GPUs that stays there and increases over time, then great, well positioned. And there's another element of this that he brought in, which I've actually been thinking about a ton, because I think you're going to see a lot more of this particular benchmark going forward from data center companies, is concurrent inference per user. So how many people can your system hold at one time inferencing, right? So ChatGPT is a good example of this. Let's say there's 10 million people querying at one time doing inference. Okay, so you need to be able to hold a concurrent user load for inference. And I feel like he was saying this without directly saying that these GPUs are still going to be the best place to manage concurrent user load for inference. And that's a strong story if that's true. I don't know if it's true, to be honest with you. I know, as we talked about, the hyperscalers doing competitive things in their own accelerators and inference engines, but that's an absolute point. Like, you want these things to be responsive and quick, and it needs to handle concurrent users doing massive matrix multiplication on these systems. So I think that's where he's going with this point, which is sort of what I'm saying. It's a good argument if it's true. I just don't know if it's really true. But yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
So all right. Let me tack that apart because I've been thinking about that a lot too. And one, I've come to the conclusion that 40% of our sales go to inference. That figure is misleading. It sounds great. It's a good indication, but like we're way too early in the market to know this,
Okay.
to know
Okay.
anything. I
Okay.
think I've been talking to people all last 2 weeks heavily, doing a lot of diligence stuff around AI, and I'm increasingly convinced that a lot of inference will be done on CPU or not GPU, other
Mm,
things. A lot of CPU.
mm-hmm.
It's just, especially when GPUs are in such tight supply and they are so expensive,
Yeah.
right? That being said, if Nvidia comes out with a new chip next year that's a costed down inference special chip, I think they'll reset that math considerably. Maybe they can't,
Sorry, you mean
but
a
that's certainly
dedicated inference
like a
chip, basically?
like a dedicated inference chip that costs
Okay.
a lot less. And right,
Okay.
that's one thing they can do. The other thing they can do is they're building a lot of software between their software layer and their NVLink networking stuff and Spectrum X, their Ethernet stuff. They have this networking layer and they have the software layer, which ties all their stuff together. They will. They are essentially making a very compelling case for just take your model, run it on NVIDIA for training, and then it just be very low friction, one click transfer to the model and deployment for inference on our silicon.
Mm-hmm.
And some customers will find that sort of the friction of taking the model from the NVIDIA system, porting it all over to their CPUs will be too much for some subset of customers, not the hyperscalers, but others. And so there is like I don't think that Nvidia will own 100% or 95% of the inference market the way they own 95% of the training market. But there's no reason to think they couldn't own 50%, 60%, 40%. And that would keep the numbers going incredibly for a long time. So there's room for everybody
Okay.
here, including a lot of Nvidia.
Okay. I think that's fair. I think, one of the things that I feel like Jensen tries to make every quarter, and this again is part of just understanding the cornerstone that might be NVIDIA's total solution in AI in the data center is this TCO point. Like he keeps saying, if you're gonna train those workloads on NVIDIA GPUs and then inference those workloads also on NVIDIA GPUs, in terms of your cost to compute, is it's the best TCO. And again, I think everybody's going to make different decisions as to why they want workloads, but as you know, a lot is price and speed, or price performance is still going to continue to be a driving factor. So I feel like he keeps hitting this. It's just the best TCO. It's the best. Like he doesn't let go of that point. And again, he needs to believe that, right? Nvidia needs to believe that. They need that to be true. I think you're right in that there will be a lot more diversity. But this is one of those things where if he can keep driving the cost to train down, speed to train faster, concurrent user load per inference at a fraction, of a load compared to some, like, yeah, he's got a really strong argument. But that's really the flagpole that they've got to keep planting is we got the TCO advantage over other people.
Yeah, and they have a lot of levers to pull to keep that going.
Agreed.
And
I will say the only thing I'm still in the curmudgeon camp on, whether you're in it or not, is InfiniBand. And I say that because I keep hearing from a lot of people building and deploying these things that Ethernet's often just faster. And I'm not sure I fully understand all of the technicals, but I've seen tons of reports about this, like quantifying Ethernet is still faster on these performance loads than InfiniBand.
so 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 I'm very glad you mentioned that, because first of all, Ethernet is faster, but InfiniBand has lower latency, and for AI, especially for training, latency is more important
Hmm.
because you have all these things moving around. You don't want to be constantly waiting for the next thing to show up.
Of course.
So it's
Yeah.
much lower latency. Uh, Ethernet has the benefit of being this well-established standard that's been around for a long time. It's a good standard and a healthy standard. It will catch up. What's it called? Ultra X. I'm getting all my acronyms,
Oh
all my
man,
consortia
I can
confused.
find it because I just read a report on this. But yeah, it's something like that. The next gen
So yeah,
Ethernet.
the next gen that's coming from everybody who's not Nvidia, basically.
Yeah.
That looks promising, but it's not here yet. On their call, Nvidia announced Spectrum X. What is it with
Yeah.
X's this year? They announced Spectrum X, which is their version of their Ethernet product that does the same thing. And so I'm not sure that he really cares, because the key part isn't necessarily the standard InfiniBand versus Ethernet. It's the ties into the hooks into the Nvidia stack that will matter here. And so you're going to get better performance from a complete Nvidia stack, whether it's using Ethernet or InfiniBand. You'll get that whole system of approach, and that will be their advantage, even if
Mm,
everybody else wants to go to Ethernet. So
mm,
it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, but just like keep in mind one statistic: they actually started breaking out their data center networking revenue this
yes.
quarter.
Right. Right.
They did $3 billion in data center networking. Right,
Yeah.
Nvidia's networking business is now larger than Arista.
Yeah.
They do more
Yeah.
revenue than Arista, which just sells networking equipment. Right,
Right.
and
Right.
I'm pretty sure that Nvidia's data center networking business is much larger than Cisco's networking business. Right,
Mm.
so they're like this big force in networking. You're right. Maybe it doesn't last forever, but they're
It's
they're
along
not
for the
standing
ride.
still. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. No. Along for the ride. Okay. I'm super curious about this though, because this feels like a fight where okay, I'll put it to you this way. You tell me if you agree. I feel like that this part of the stack, networking, it feels like they have a bit more immediate competition in from a number of others than other parts of their stack. I guess that's my point.
I think of this like I think across their stack they have little bits of they have little bits of competition, and I think it's pretty equivalent levels across everything. right? There's a little bit of competition for training, right? There's MI300 from AMD
I
and
mean,
Google.
I don't think so, but sure, I'm with you.
It exists, right? It exists. It's going to be deployed.
Okay.
You have probably more significant. You have Trillium from Google,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
But right in all these categories, you can find there's something competing with it that's not quite like you're skeptical about it, but it's there. It exists, right?
Sure.
So that's true in
Sure.
training.
Sure.
In networking, we have this thing, and like we have this Ethernet versus InfiniBand debate, and yeah, it's probably closer here, but it's important,
Yes. Agree.
and right. And then if you think about software, they have CUDA, which is all conquering, but AMD has ROCm, which is not great, but it kind of does some stuff. And then you have PyTorch, Triton, that whole thing. Like the competition exists in all these categories, um, and so the problem is all those things are far behind, right? And I think
Yep.
we talked about this out of GTC. One of the things that really caught my attention at GTC was Jensen said their advantage in inference right now is built on top of networking. Like he
Yep.
said that, and then he quickly like realized he shouldn't have said that. And he started adding other things, but like that was his knee jerk answer. Oh, we're killing it because of networking. And so yeah, this area around InfiniBand is really really important, and there is competition here, but the company Nvidia is not standing still,
Yeah.
and so they'll have Spectrum X to keep it moving forward. And
Agreed.
I'll tell you one thing that really stood out for me on this call was just the pace at which they're moving.
Yes, of course. 100%.
Right. I
It's
mean,
crazy.
it's yeah, a new chip a year. That's like what
Yeah.
are they,
At some,
Apple?
it's yeah. At some point, like we should just really dig into either with us or somebody else that's got technical, like just how they're doing this architecturally, because it's not trivial. Um, so anyway, that one. Okay, last point, then we'll wrap. What's your take? You and I talked about it, but I think we should dig into it for publicly because not everyone can read our text message thread. Um, the 10-to-1
Oh
stock
God.
split. 10-to-1 stock
Oh
split.
jeez.
Let's just last end on this point. You made some
Okay.
points. I'm gonna make some points. So go.
Wait, before we get there, I want to add one more quick thing,
Okay.
which
Okay.
will put that is important. I do a share of wallet tracker every quarter. I look at AMD, Intel, and Nvidia's reported data center revenue, and I
Mm-hmm.
add them all up, and that's the processor data center market. Nvidia now claims 81% of that.
Mm.
Right? Now that includes networking. You take that out, it's 78%. Right?
Mm-hmm.
80% of the money spent in data centers on CPU, GPU goes to Nvidia. 5 years ago, it was
Crazy.
zero. It was zero. It was
Zero.
rounding error.
Yep.
I
Game,
mean, and
man.
that's the game. All right, 10-for-1 stock split is catnip, clickbait for retail investors.
100%.
100%.
100%.
Wow. And people, but look, I mean, look at the stock price. It seems to be working. Right. I was on a where was it? I was not Reddit. I think I was on a Discord thread about this, and like there are other reasons for it too, right? And it's like it makes share grants for employees easier. You don't have to deal with fractional shares, and but really,
Yeah.
it's there for retail
So
investors who love it.
that's my read as well. And so there's two questions here then. So okay, I fundamentally agree with you. This is going to make it very easy for a ton of retail to get in, and they're going to increase that to, if retail's whatever, let's just say 10 to 15% today. I mean, it could go 30%, 40%. I don't know. But with that comes a ton of volatility. The potential for it to be a meme stock again. People are going to profit take and then it's going to drop and get back in. And so you're going to see traders trade on this in a way. So tons of volatility. And this is where I'm kind of more interested in. That has to assume that they believe that the stock's going to still go up a lot. I mean, maybe not back to 1,000. Maybe it will. I don't know. Remember back in the days where Microsoft would go to 200 and split, and then go to 200 and split, and go to 200 like almost every year. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, but that 100% like indicates that there's a ton of upside growth in this stock once you do that. And so we're already sitting here going, so there's already people saying they're overvalued, right, at their current. To think that 4 trillion is in sight sooner than people think, like I, I don't know, but this move I think insinuates that you bring it down to wherever it's going to be, probably around 100 ish, that it's going to continue its meteoric rise in share price.
Well, you've just spelled out the reason all those retail investors are going to get in. Like
Totally,
that's
I
that's
I know
that's the
they will,
fallacy.
but they'll overly inflate, artificially inflate it. Agreed for the money. I'm just saying, like there won't be a valid justification for its value. Will be my point. Like we've been arguing before. Like I don't think maybe
they,
but maybe not.
I mean, they grew 450% last year or year on
Yeah,
year,
right,
right?
but that's
On a
not.
huge base, on a huge
Yes,
base.
yes.
So who are we to say what that company, what the right valuation for Nvidia is? I'm not
Agreed.
touching that one. Like I don't,
Agreed. 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 But but again, it just comes back to like you're going to have a lot of people argue the fundamentals. At this point, that's out the door. We can't do it anymore. Like, don't even
yeah,
try.
yeah. I said that a few episodes ago. I was like, today we're just going to talk about Nvidia the business because Nvidia
Right.
the stock makes no sense to me. They're
Right.
not
100.
necessarily
Totally.
related.
Totally. Totally. All right. Until next time. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll tease the topic for next week. We're going to talk about NPUs in detail because they are all the rage. So stay tuned for that. Click like, share, subscribe, send along, send to your corporate intranet, whatever you want to do, send around. Continue to help us promote the podcast. We appreciate all of you that listen and your feedback. So thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. To the moon, everybody.
To the moon.